We won reparations in 1988. But Japanese Americans were not the first to make that demand. Our community's demand for reparations did not arise by itself, but was inspired by the Black community's fight for civil and equal rights in housing, education, and more. Their sacrifices and leadership opened the doors for us and gave us the strength to demand redress and reparations from the U.S. government. We have to acknowledge the generous support of many Black groups and individuals who supported us in our campaign for redress, like Congressman Mervyn Dimely, who authored a Japanese American Redress Bill in 1982, Representative Ron Dellums, who spoke in support of the bill, and the Black Congressional Caucus, and many others, including then California Assemblywoman Maxine Waters and the Reverend Jesse Jackson. And H.R. 40, as you know, has a long history thanks to late Congressman John Conyers. H.R. 40 is an opportunity for all of us to learn about the institution and legacy of slavery and its destructive impact that continues today on the Black community. This is a chance for many Black voices to be heard and for the Black community to express what kind of reparations it is owed. What we must do is listen and learn from these stories, from broader historical context to the most personal testimonies of pain, trauma, and generational struggle. H.R. 40 is a necessary first step towards justice. It is the first step towards healing.
Thank you, Ron. Good morning. I'm going to take a different road a little bit. I was with the National Coalition for Redress and Reparations, which was a grassroots organization, and I'll kind of be sharing our journey in the campaign for redress and reparations. But first, I want to acknowledge the difference in our fight for reparations for the injustice of the concentration camps and the 400 years of history of enslaved people. We're not here to make recommendations or to prescribe lessons learned. I'm here to share the experiences of NCRR and all volunteer grassroots organizations that fought for reparations and to express our continuing solidarity for Black reparations today. So, thank you. Historically, California was ground zero for anti-Japanese hate and anti-Asian legislation. This set the stage for imprisoning Japanese Americans in World War II concentration camps. We recognize the origin of this violence and racism began with the white supremacist and colonialist actions against indigenous peoples and kidnapped and enslaved Africans. And we see that winning Black reparations is specific, deserved, and long overdue. And your victory will give hope and inspiration to other communities. I feel like this is a political rally. So my mother was imprisoned in Manzanar concentration camp. My dad was a staff sergeant in the 10442nd, as Ron said, the all-Japanese segregated Army unit that suffered more casualties and won more medals of valor than any other Army unit of its size in the history of the U.S. Army, a story that we share with the Tuskegee Airmen. Like so many Nisei, second-generation Japanese Americans, they didn't talk to us about the camp. We grew up not knowing our own history, a history that's been deliberately kept from us in school, just as we're seeing with the CRT today. Our parents' silence about camp came out of the trauma, anger, shame, and wanting to shield us from the viciousness of racism and incarceration. They carried an unspoken fear that this could happen again, because they heard of that legislation in Congress to sterilize all Japanese American women of childbearing age that was narrowly defeated. It had intergenerational consequences. We were told, keep a low profile. The nail that sticks its head up gets its head pounded down. We were becoming invisible, the checkbox marked other. My parents told us we had to be twice as good as white people to succeed. That despicable label, model minority, was used as a divide and conquer tactic to drive a wedge between us and other communities. Finally, in the 60s and 70s, with the civil rights and the Black and Chicano power movements, young Asians were energized. We were inspired by leaders like Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, and Fred Hampton. We modeled our Serve the People programs after the Black Panthers' free breakfast and free healthcare programs, and we marched in solidarity to free political prisoners like George and Jonathan Jackson, which set the future stage for the Free Chotsa We movement. We learned and lived Third World unity, the power of grassroots organizing, and our history through the movement for social justice. I first heard about reparations through the Republic of New Africa, who also told us about Queen Mother Moore and the Deacons for Defense, and I had read about it in the Panthers' 10-point program. As Ron and Mitch talked about, there were several national Japanese American organizations with different strategies for reparations. JACL was more mainstream and took a legislative avenue. NCJAR was looking at a class action suit. The Quorum Novus Supreme Court Committee that was member Don Tamaki played a key role in, was looking towards overturning the Supreme Court case against camps. And then there was NCRR. Our founding members were 60s and 70s movement activists. Our principles of unity called for uniting Japanese Americans around reparations, restitution to the community, overturning the legal basis for the camps, and demanding direct individual monetary reparations now. I know that I'm really cutting everything close, but these were the days before there was social media. So organizing and outreach meant getting in your car and driving places. So I was sent to a town hall meeting in Gardena, which had the largest Japanese American population outside of Hawaii in those days, right? Steve Bradford. The keynote speaker in that town hall meeting was Congressman Mervyn Dimely. And I was there to ask him what his position was on reparations. He wanted to know more and invited me to his office. We talked. The next weekend, he came to the NCRR steering committee meeting and offered to introduce legislation calling for reparations. Mervyn Dimely is an unsung hero of our reparations movement. But the bill to establish the Presidential Study Commission on Wartime Relocation and Internment of Civilians, the CWRIC bill, passed. We weren't happy like a lot of other people. We were concerned that the study commission would delay reparations for our elders who were already in their 80s and 90s. We were concerned that the hearings would be Washington, D.C. centered, and we wanted to ensure that the voices of our community, the voices of our people, would be highlighted at those hearings. NCRR lobbied those commissioners. We said, to have meaningful hearings, you have to go to every major city with a significant Japanese American population. Fortunately, we had 20 days of hearing in 10 cities and had 750 testimonies. 750 people broke their silence. The first hearing was in LA. We wanted to set the tone and make sure that it was a people's hearing, but it was harder than we thought. Breaking a 40-year silence was difficult. It would be the first time folks would talk about camp, and the first time for most people to speak publicly, and then to speak before a presidential commission was even more intimidating. So we had to do a lot of work. We did outreach with the churches, marketplaces, posted flyers, house meetings, workshops, practice sessions for folks, coordinated transportation, and it paid off. We had to get an extra hearing room in the state building for the overflow crowds. We had an extra evening hearing for working folks. There was good media coverage every day, which was really important to us because most of the country didn't even know about the camps or care about it. During the lunch breaks at the hearings, we provided obento lunches and programs with solidarity speakers from other communities to build allyship. The value of these hearings were incredible, as Ron said. Standing up and speaking out was powerful and transforming for our community that was told to be quiet Americans. The testimonies educated my entire generation. Those stories exposed a little-known history, and the hearings gained national media attention and started generating support. Those hearings and our people that spoke put a human face on the Japanese American concentration camp experience for the nation and for the world. And each testimony of family separation, lives lost, stolen lands, peeled layer after layer and revealed an ugly core of white supremacy, systemic racism, and economic exploitation. The commission report, Personal Justice Denied, called it race prejudice, war hysteria, and a failure of political leadership. They found no military necessity for the camps. The commission recommended a presidential apology, the Civil Liberties Education Fund, and direct monetary reparations. It was immediately put into legislation where we faced a real uphill battle in Congress, maybe similar to what the task force will be facing when they introduce legislation in the state and Senate and Assembly. For us, we were such a small population. Gaining allies was really crucial to our campaign. We needed to get those votes. One advantage was that we had 4 Japanese American legislators who were leading the fight in Congress. It was like years, and finally, Congressman Norman Ninetta called and said, "The big vote is taking place. It's do or die. NCRR, you got to pull out the stops." It was the call we were waiting for, and so we went into organizing mode, as did all the organizations in the community. We ended up organizing a delegation of 141 grassroots lobbyists. And these were folks from all walks of life: gardeners, doctors, attorneys, truck drivers, students, elders. These people saved up their money and saved up their vacation time and went to Washington, D.C. to fight for justice and redress. Now I want to put in another high five for Congressman Mervyn Dineley. He was the chair of the Congressional Black Caucus, which stood behind the Japanese American reparations all the way. They were the strongest allies. They brought the Hispanic Congressional Caucus with them too. But Congressman Dineley flew me out to Washington, D.C. 3 weeks early so I could schedule 101 lobby visits. He offered his office as kind of an unofficial headquarters for our grassroots lobbyists. And none of them ever had lobbied before. None of us had ever lobbied before. And so, 141 people getting lost, losing their schedules. The congressman's office was like our lighthouse. We won 243 to 141 in the Senate. And of course, senators like Sparky Matsunaga almost single-handedly got those 69 votes in the Senate. In August 1988, the Civil Liberties Act was signed by, why did it have to be President Reagan? Then began the whole ordeal of fighting for appropriations and then working to identify folks. But that's a whole other long story that you can read in NCRR's book. Okay, so what is our legacy? What are the takeaways? Well, one, the importance of the hearings. It was the opportunity for our people to stand up, stand together, and speak out, and it unified our community. Those testimonies put a spotlight on the role and the character of the United States government. And I believe that our community recognized through that our shared history with other communities of color in this country. The campaign, the struggle for redress connected the dots for us as we saw our commonalities. So when 9/11 happened, Japanese Americans were among the first to step out and speak out against the racial profiling that was being done to the Muslims, because we know what racial profiling does. When ICE started to try to open some of the detention camps that once imprisoned us to house families seeking asylum, Japanese Americans stood up. And then when Black reparations began building up steam, Japanese Americans stepped forward and saw that as part of our struggle. The other thing is the importance of unity. There were differences in our community, and NCRR, and I think back from the movement days, our principles of unity always talked about building unity, and from unity comes strength. And even people like Congressman Mineta, he kept admonishing us, you got to present a united front to the public. Keep the infighting within our family. Lastly, we connected the dots. This whole struggle connected the dots. We connected the dots between the civil rights and the Black liberation movement and the Asian movement. Connected the dots from the lessons and principles from the Asian movement, which informed NCRR's grassroots campaign. The campaign for redress was part of an overall struggle for social justice that continues today with Nikkei Progressives and NCRR, which now is known as Nikkei for Civil Rights and Redress. In May of this year, we formed a national coalition of Japanese Americans to stand in solidarity with the fight for Black reparations today. And lastly, I really want to give a shout out to the AB 3121 Task Force report. The history and the knowledge in this report is so important, and it's important to all communities. It's a continuing part of what was supposed to be our work in the community, the community fund that we got in the bill that they short shrifted us from $50 million down to $5 million. Part of that was to be worked towards non-repetition. Well, with your report, we can continue that work for non-repetition. And with our new National Nikkei Reparations Coalition, at our last meeting, we talked about we're going to beta test your report for a book club. Maybe taking, 1 or 2 chapters at a time and using that as a tool, not only to further educate ourselves and our community, but to organize and mobilize people in support of African American reparations. So again, the Japanese American Redress and Reparations movement was not an isolated campaign. It was part of a continuation of a legacy of building a movement that continues today. And we want to thank you for letting us share our experience and to continue to stand in solidarity with Black reparations.
We support reparations because it is long overdue.
You, the Black community, have taken blows for all people of color. We embrace your leadership in our struggle.
Even after 400 plus years, you are the vanguard in the fight against white supremacy.
私は第一世代の移民として公民権運動での戦いとそれを受けて成立した1965年の改正移民法に恩恵を受けています。黒人コミュニティが権利の獲得のために戦ってくれたからこそ私はここにいるのです。今度は私たちがすべての人々の自由のために立ち上がる時なのです。I am here today because of the Immigration and Naturalization Act of 1965, thanks to the 1960s Civil Rights Movement and to the Black community who fought for all of us.
We support Black reparations now because justice delayed is justice denied, and it's been far too long.
The time is now to courageously work to decolonize ourselves.
To build a movement of solidarity with Black-led organizing efforts for justice.
We need to address centuries of racism.
A debt that is owed and must be paid.
We need to restore pride and dignity.
It is never too late to do the right thing.
We need to confront this racist history to overcome the legacy of slavery and its continuing harm on Black lives. 奴隷制度という負の遺産と今日に至る黒人の人たちへの悪影響を乗り越えるためには、私たちはこの人種差別の歴史とまず向き合わなければなりません。
I support reparations because my humanity depends on it.
Because of slavery, the Black codes, Jim Crow, murder, rape, and theft.
Because my heart breaks for Emmett Till, brutalized, lynched, and dead at 14. For Tamir Rice, shot dead by police at age 12. Even children are not safe.
Because I cannot pretend that I don't see the harms and injustices of slavery or turn my back on all the George Floyds.
Because we are all living on stolen land that has been shaped by the horrors of chattel slavery.
In order to heal, this country must own up to its past and redress and remedy the damages to African American people.
The pain of harms committed will deepen and continue to manifest in new forms. We need to reckon with our past and present on the road to making amends.
We support reparations because it's the right thing to do.
Because economic justice is racial justice. There can be no just society without it.
Because of a convergence of factors. The mass outrage over the George Floyd killing.
A resistance and the awareness of racial disparities in wealth and income.
And the resurgence of a Black youth movement that is finding its role in leadership in the reparations cause.
Black resistance has never flinched against seemingly insurmountable oppression.
We must act and work in solidarity now.
The only way we lose the struggle for reparations is not to fight for it.
We support reparations because our humanity is on the line.
Because of every policy, institution, and system that led us into today.
Because there will be no reconciliation without reckoning, no healing without repair.
Justice.
Now.
Reparations.
Now.